So, welcome to another episode of the Mind Solution podcast, where I am so excited and so thrilled to be joined by Jamie Smart. And Jamie Smart is the Sunday best-selling author of the book Clarity and Results, and is a keynote speaker, the founder of the Clarity Certification Program, and somebody who's been my coach and mentor for the last 12 months. So welcome, Jamie Smart.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Sarah, and it's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too, me too. So one of the things that, many of the things that Jamie and I are going to explore in this podcast is to really deep dive and unpick some of the material that's contained within Jamie's book about clarity, and how clarity, from my experience, is really the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle when it comes to leaders and organizations alike. So maybe a great place to start, Jamie, would actually be to understand for our listeners and anybody watching this, what is clarity?
Yeah, well, when I talk about the principles behind clarity, what I'm pointing to is an innate capacity that everyone's born with for a clear mind, for high performance, for well-being and peace of mind, for things like connection and empathy, for leadership, believe it or not. Like, we've all got these qualities, resilience, we've got these qualities built in. And actually, the funny thing is, Sarah, once you kind of start seeing what we're going to be talking about, you start to notice it everywhere. You start to see that, oh yeah, this is what's already going on. So clarity isn't a technique or an approach. It's a process of pointing to something that's already going on in the world, but that we've overlooked until now. And the reason it's so powerful, one of the things I'm passionate about at the moment, well, I'll give you a little bit of backstory. When I first stumbled across the principles behind clarity about 14 years ago, I started having insights. My first insight was, oh, everything you've been looking for outside of you is already there within you. Now, here's the thing. I knew, like, from years of study, that ultimately, and all the surveys recognize this, that ultimately it's things like love and connection and connections and the people around you and a feeling of fulfillment and accomplishment that does it for people. But all too often we get caught up in this idea of I'll be happy when I achieve this or that or the other. So I just kind of saw through that, and that immediately started reorganizing my priorities. But then the second thing I realized was that, oh, everyone's got this source of clarity and resilience and well-being and performance already there within them. And then I realized that these are principles. These are principles like gravity's a principle. Now, the cool thing about principles is, with a principle, it's already up and running. So you just need to kind of get eyes for it and you start to benefit from it. So anyway, I immediately became passionate about it. It's what I've been doing ever since. It's why I wrote Clarity. It's why I'm about to release the 10th anniversary edition of Clarity, which I'm delighted about. But the funny thing is, since the book was written, it was first released just under 10 years ago, what I was pointing to in it was, look, we live in this world where we're inundated by information through social media and books and articles, all that sort of stuff. We've got tons of information coming in, overwhelmed by it. And it's a time in history where we desperately need access to that mental clarity and well-being that allows us to have an enjoyable experience of life, but also the mental clarity and wisdom that allows us to make good decisions. Because the thing is, the world we're living in today is a digital world, and digital technology accelerates at an exponential rate, but our habitual patterns of thinking are designed for a linear world. So, simple test everyone listening can do. If you imagine taking 30 linear steps, how far will that get you? Look around and get you across the street or across the room or whatever. But 30 exponential steps, where they double each time, that'll get you to the moon. And digital technology that is giving us so many benefits is also accelerating at an exponential rate. So we need access to this clarity of thought to allow us to make the decisions that are going to make a difference to us.
Mm. And I loved what you said there about how everything that we're looking for is already within us. And particularly thinking about resilience, thinking about well-being, because from the organizations that I speak to, that I work with, there are more often than not, in fact, most of the time they all are, looking outside of themselves for how do we create a resilient workforce? How do we create well-being in the workforce? You know, how do we make our leaders more resilient or more empathetic or more great leaders? And when I came to this understanding, I thought, oh, we don't need to do anything. We just need to point them, as you said, in the right direction. And I'd love you to just give your thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, let's start with the leaders and then work our way through the organization, because I guess it's pretty well recognized by now that most organizations are kind of a hologram of the leader, if you like. You know, the leadership is reflected in every aspect of the organization, so for better or for worse. There's a Japanese saying that the fish rots from the head down, and so let's start with the leaders. My assertion is, you know, it's funny, if you go on Amazon and type in leadership, you'll get, I don't know, 100,000, 200,000 leadership books coming up. But leadership is one of those domains that's not well understood. So my assertion is this: like, if you imagine for a moment pretending to have a cold. I bet lots of the people listening to this have pretended to have a cold when they called in sick from work or that sort of thing, or maybe amped it up. And the thing is, if you're pretending to have a cold, it's hard work and it's not that convincing. But if you've actually got a cold, the symptoms emerge automatically, no effort required. Well, what I'm going to suggest is that most leadership books are trying to get you to pretend to be a leader, like they're giving you the symptoms of leadership, whereas the most powerful way to do it is to catch the bug of leadership and the bug is to get connected with the innate source of leadership that everyone has within them. Because if you take a step back and you think about what leadership is, it's about having an idea of somewhere that you're headed that's worth going, and then inviting people to come with you. Either, you know, inviting by whatever means, you know, but by whatever means makes sense. So for that to be real and authentic, the leader needs to have a felt sense of connection to what they're wanting to create. It's got to matter to them. You know, all too often, you know, if we look at a lot of, particularly a lot of blue chips, actually, oftentimes the primary motive factor seems to be massive bonuses and that sort of thing. Well, it's hard to get everyone else on board with that. And in his book Drive, Daniel Pinker, after a lot of research, determines that while money can be a motivator in a short term for relatively manual tasks, for cognitive stuff, it's actually a negative, it's a demotivator. And that for cognitive stuff, that autonomy and mastery and purpose, meaning, those are important. So it seems to me that the starting point for leadership is about having somewhere worth going, that you genuinely want to go. And that's what defines purpose. And then you need to engage other people in this. Now, here's another really interesting piece that relates to it. There's a Harvard Business Review article called, I think it's called State of Mind Drives Performance, or the link between state of mind and performance. It's in my book, Results, but I won't be able to find it. So the researchers, Callie, Hirschberg, and Petty, they interviewed leaders, senior executives in like 750 companies globally. And they asked them a simple question. They gave them a list of like 17 states of mind, ranging from like bliss and euphoria to abject despair and that sort of thing. So they got these 17 things, and they just got them to rate where they spent most of their day, where they were spending their time, and which of those states of mind were correlated with performance, high performance, and which were correlated with low performance. What they discovered was that high performance was correlated with the states of mind of calm, happy, and energized. So they said there's a direct correlation between people being calm, and between leaders being calm, happy, and energized, and high performance. They said that on the flip side, there's a direct correlation between low performance and frustration, anxiety, tiredness, stress. So stress leaders are operating at a lower level of performance. Now, here's the icing on the cake. In both cases, the state of mind of the leader is kind of infectious and gets picked up by the team and the organization around them. So I lay that out because what I'm going to suggest is that it's really interesting. Actually, I wrote about this in results as well. I was speaking to the general manager of a large hotel in London, and I was asking him about, he wanted to look at doing a program with his staff and that sort of thing. And I asked him about what his objectives were. So I said, like, the kind of questions I ask. If I could wave a magic wand and you could have everything you want be the way you want to be around here, how would you want it to be? Well, he said right away, he said, that's easy. We need to be top 10 in TripAdvisor for London. Ideally close to the top, ideally number one, but that may be a pipe dream. But we need to be top 10 because, of course, in London, TripAdvisor is how people are finding hotels. And if you're not in the top 10, you're not getting it. So anyway, I said, oh, okay, well, what do you think makes the difference? What's going to do that? And he said, well, it's going to be the attitude of the team, the everyone that the customers and guests are interacting with. It's going to be their vibe. I said, right on. That, I was genuinely gratified because it's so rare to hear that. But this guy really got it. So I said, what are you doing? He said, what can you do? Like we've repainted the break room where they have their breaks, and we're giving them free sandwiches. But everything that he had absolutely locked onto what the factor was that was going to drive results. So he knew what it was. He just didn't know where it came from. Mm-hmm. So we had a conversation, and during that conversation, I said, you know what, you're the first person I've spoken to in a long time who intuitively knew what the driver was. Now we just got to find out, how is that activated? Well, what I'm going to suggest is, Sarah, is that the difference between a staff member who's in a good state of mind, who's calm, happy, energized, glad to be at work, connecty, that sort of thing, and one who's miserable, stressed, all that sort of thing, is going to be entirely internally generated. And the good news is that a calm, happy, energized state of mind is actually natural for human beings when nothing else gets in the way. If you doubt that, look at kids. Look at little kids. You look at little kids, or, we live in a world where little kids are born with beautiful mental health. Their mental health is excellent. We don't see little kids going for psychotherapy session at, age 2 and that sort of thing. Babies are, and then through the process of enculturation, they're turned into mentally unwell teenagers and adults in fairly short order. My assertion to you, as you know, is that clarity and peace of mind and well-being is our natural state, and all that gets in the way of it is a simple misunderstanding about how our experience is created.
And it's so interesting that you talk about the gentleman about all the things that he was doing in the environment, in the physical environment, to try to influence, to try and create that state. Because something that I hear so many times is when I ask an organization, tell me more about yourself, 9 times out of 10, they will say, well, it's a very fast-paced environment. Now, I don't know about you, but fast-paced environment doesn't really give me any information about what it's like. It could just mean that there's a lot of things which are maybe dysfunctional, and that they have this misunderstanding that there's something in the environment that's contributing to burnout, that's contributing to performance, that's contributing to how we feel. So what would you say to somebody that's saying, but we're different, we have this really fast-paced environment?
Well, I know there are a lot of industries where fast pace is just that's comes with the territory. So it's like, I know that I'm not going to get any traction by, I've heard other people say, yeah, you just need to slow down. It's like, well, hang on a second. If you're working in an industry that's highly competitive, and that you're I don't know, doing software projects or whatever it might be, it is going to be fast paced. There's going to be a fast pace. And so the question is, what's the difference between, because I guarantee you, if you look at companies who are operating at a fast pace and delivering results, like doing it, you'll see a range in terms of mental health and well-being. You'll have super fast-paced companies where staff members are exhibiting high levels of mental health and well-being, and you'll have super fast-paced companies where the rate of burnout is through the roof. So the pace is not, if that's the case, right? If you've got both, then pace is not a determining factor. Like in any case, when you're looking to explain, so if you want an explanatory factor, you need to make sure that it is explanatory. So if there are fast-paced businesses where people are robustly energetic and healthy and that sort of thing, and fast-paced businesses where they're not, where they're burned out, where they're falling off the perch, then pace isn't the discriminator. So we need to find out what's the discriminator. And my simple answer to the question is, the discriminator is going to be the climate of the company. One of my clients is and he's a dear friend as well. I don't want to be specific about the space, but he works in the large startup space, has successfully grown and launched large organizations several times over, and now runs a consultancy doing that. But we're having a conversation about this, and he said what he's found that is absolutely essential in growing a fast-paced team. He said, number one, you've got to have that sense of pace. And he actually used the word urgency. He said, you have to have that sense of urgency because things are happening so fast. He said, however, everyone has to feel safe. Mm-hmm. So it's not about, I don't think fast or slow is the discriminator. If you've ever been to the DVLA in the UK, or the whatever, I can't remember what the post office in the US, that people can be really, really unhappy and burned out without moving at a fast pace. I think that people need to feel psychologically safe. They need to feel psychologically safe. They need to feel that they have the freedom to experiment and grow and express themselves, to make mistakes. And so that's what he said, the faster pace they wanted to run at, the more psychological safety people needed to experience. He said, if you had that, and you had to have that sense of purpose, like everyone on the same team working towards something that really mattered to all of them, and they needed to feel psychologically safe. I think there may be something in there about a feeling of belonging, and belonging to something worth belonging to. But all these feelies like, belonging and safe and that sort of thing. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from within, that comes from within. And I'm not to say there aren't things that companies and leaders can do to enculture that, to encourage that. There absolutely are. And my assertion is, as you know, the number one, the fast track to experiencing a greater sense of safety, security, well-being, peace of mind, resilience, all of that stuff for yourself is to get a deeper understanding of the principles behind clarity. I have found no quicker way to do it. And to give some context, for the 10 years before I stumbled across the principles behind clarity, I was exploring everything I could find to do that work, because I was working as an executive coach. I was doing change work with people and all that sort of stuff, trainer. And so NLP, CBT, basically if it Jungian, positive psychology, all that stuff, I was going for whatever I could find to help create those conditions for people, help people create those conditions for themselves. But when I came across the principles behind clarity, it's by far the fastest route I've found to connecting with that source of resilience, peace of mind, clarity, and well-being that exists within everyone. And then what that drives is high performance.
Yeah. And the word psychological safety is one which we're hearing much more nowadays, certainly over the last, I would say, 12, 24 months. And I know from the management mental health training that we provide, it's helping managers to understand how they can cultivate, as you say, that feeling of psychological safety. And I guess that comes also back to, as you said, the leadership piece, and really being able to connect with their people in a way that allows them to generate those feelings of feeling safe. And a big thing that I certainly observe when it comes to leaders and managers is the piece around really listening and listening well. And I know that so many of the hundreds and hundreds of people that we've put through our programs, they think they're really good listeners. And then they go through the program and they go, oh, okay, I listen to respond. Or their mind, because they haven't got that peace of mind, their mind's just going at 100 miles an hour. So they're not really listening. And I'd love your thoughts about listening as well, being that such an impactful thing in terms of leadership impact.
Yeah, well, it's funny, it really connects into everything you were just talking about, because and I was one of those people, right? When I first came to this understanding, I thought I was a ninja listener, but I was just really good at paying attention to all the bits of what someone was saying so I could respond right. And when I learned to listen, what I discovered is that really listening, it's kind of interesting. There are a couple of elements that strike me. One is that if you stop and think about it for a moment, the word empathy brings into connection about a bunch of different other ideas, including intimacy, including the feeling of connection, all that sort of stuff. Well, the amount of connection, empathy that someone will experience in conversation with you is going to be inverse to the degree you're trying to control the conversation, right? So what I found is that when people learn how to listen, it's like a shortcut for connection and empathy. Like you feel closer to the people around you. Now, a couple of things, and then I'll talk specifically about listening. There's this great film with Russell Crowe called Master and Commander, and he plays the captain of the Bounty, of the mutiny on the Bounty ship. So he's the captain of that ship, and what he demonstrates in that role is that sometimes he has to be in times of crisis, he has to be total authoritarian, just tell people what to do. And this makes sense, right? Like if you're in a building in your office with a bunch of people and there's a fire, you say, okay, we're going out this way. You tell them what to do. If people go, oh, but I don't like being talked to like that. It's like, get out of the building, oh, but it's like, people just have to do what they're told when it comes to that sort of thing. Or that's the kind of style of leadership, if you like, is a much more authoritarian approach in times of crisis. Now, that's useful, but you don't want to be using it all the time, because it's going to cost you in terms of empathy, connection, well-being, and if you use it all the time. In times that aren't crisis, a much more collaborative approach is going to give the opportunity to build empathy and connection and that sort of thing. And so I think that we see the link back to the Harvard Business School piece. If leaders are in a place of frustration, anxiety, tired, stressed, they're going to be operating as if it's a crisis. And so they're going to be relating to their work, their team, their colleagues, whoever, their clients, their customers, they're going to be relating to them as though it's a crisis and as though they're objects to be transacted with rather than fellow human beings to be in relationship with. Because, empathy and connection is about relationship. So to me, there's a direct line between state of mind and empathy, connection, resilience, all of that stuff. It's all one thing. It's all the same thing. It's like a sliding scale. As we slide it up and down, we'll see all those other things that are important to the organization, either going up or down. So it looks like a simple thing at first, but it's actually connected, not just into connection and empathy and that sort of thing, but also creativity and problem solving, also in being able to find solutions to impossible problems. Also in being able to, stay in touch with or rediscover purpose and direction in the business. It's all connected to that. So with how that ties into listening is, if you want, like, the best hack I've ever found for building connection in relationship is genuinely listen in the way that you listen to something that you're interested in or fascinated by, or music or poetry. Like, listen to really do your best to really get what it's like to be the other person, to be on the same page with them. And when you're really listening to someone, they can feel it. They can tell. Like, you can tell, right? You're listening to this, you can tell the difference when you're on the phone to someone and then you can just suddenly tell they're not listening. You can tell when someone's not listening to you. Well, it's funny, in my work, a lot of times just listening to someone has them go, oh my God, this is amazing, I want to work with you, just because they haven't had anyone actually listen to them in weeks or months or years. So it's the simplest free hack, so to speak, for just getting into connection and really getting what other people want. And the interesting side effect is it brings with it a kind of natural credibility and authority. When you genuinely listen to people, they're going to trust you more.
And I always remember you saying, when we worked together, that when you increase your ability to listen by 1%, you can increase your impact by 1,000%. And I shamelessly stole that with pride and share that with our leaders and our managers. But I'm curious to get your thoughts, Jamie, about why you think it is that people feel, from my observations, they can feel quite uncomfortable just listening. So, for example, if they've got, they've got an employee that's sharing something with them that's maybe not work related, maybe it's something personal, something around their mental health. And so many managers share that, they feel like they've got to jump in with a solution, they've got to help them solve the problem, or that to just sit and just listen, even if it's only for a few moments, it becomes uncomfortable because they feel like they need to give some feedback that they're actually listening. And it's a bit icky for some people.
Yeah, well, I guess a couple of things occur to me. One is, when we're really listening, the manager in the situation you just described, what they're responding to is their own, something that's coming from within them. It's not about the other person. I may be related to what the other person say, but it's their own experience that's driving it. And it seems like it's coming from the employee, but it's coming from them. And so one of the most valuable things that anyone can learn, I think, is realizing that those signals are coming from within you, but they're not telling you about what you have to do in this moment. Like what I find again and again and again is when you just, if you're listening to someone and you feel that stuff that's coming up, on the other side of it is often a really great idea of what to do, or something to ask, or something to suggest, or whatever it might be. And the funny thing is that the very thing that is afflicting the employee in most cases, when it comes to mental health stuff, i.e. being kind of at the mercy of their own thinking, is the same thing that's afflicting the manager who's uncomfortable. And I'll tell you a story that's sort of tangentially related. So I'm working with this client once, and he described himself as being an overthinker. And his situation was he spent every day with a ball of anxiety in his stomach, and it was affecting his work and his relationships and that sort of thing. So his boss sent him to me. And so I'm having a chat with him, and he said, yeah, I know I'm overthinking, and I know I shouldn't be doing it, but I just don't seem to be able to stop myself. So I go to him, I said, oh no, you should be doing it. He's like, what? I said, oh yeah, you're doing that. You've been doing that because it made sense to you to do it. He said, I don't understand. He said, well, I said, well, it's a fight or flight response. Basically, this guy spent all day, every day in fight or flight, and which is not good for you, as the science shows. Where the strange thing is, as human beings, we're built to be able to go into fight or flight once or twice every 24 to 48 hours with no negative effect at all. So if you stop and think about it for a moment, Sarah, for the average bunny rabbit on your local common, daily life is like the Vietnam War, right? Like they're getting dive bombed by hawks and chased by dogs and all that sort of thing. So those rabbits have to run for their lives a couple of times a day. And yet they spend most of their time eating carrots and having sex. So they're pretty chilled out. They're not going to therapy. They have pretty good mental health, right? Despite going into extreme life or death stress a couple of times a day. Us who are working in the corporate world and that sort of thing, we're tending to have no threats to our life at all, yet spending all our time in stress, or a lot of our time in stress, due to a simple understanding of how our experience is created. So I said to this guy, have you ever had that thing where you're walking through your house at night and the lights are off and you see something and it looks like an intruder, and then you realize it's a pile of coats or a hat on the back of the door or something? He said, oh yeah. He said that happened to me literally just a few days ago. I was sitting in my office and I got at home and I got a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, and I thought it was an intruder, but it was just an ironing board. I said, okay, what happened when you thought it was an intruder? He said, oh, total like heart beating, adrenaline flooding my system, all that sort of stuff. I said, right. That made sense. That's the right thing to do if there's an intruder. That makes sense. I said, what happened when you realized it was an ironing board? He goes, oh, relief. I said, now, that's totally normal for realizing that there's no intruder and it's an ironing board. I said, how did you go from being in fight or flight to being in relief? He said, oh, well, I didn't do it. I just realized it's an ironing board. I said, bingo, that's it. The moment you realize that what you thought was an external threat is actually just a mind-made ironing board, boom, you're back in reality. You're back in reality. And my assertion, which is a bold one, is that what's kind of interesting, I came across something the other day, which I thought was very fascinating. I wasn't planning to read it to you, but let me see if I can find it real quick. it's kind of long, so I won't read the whole thing. In fact, it's now I realize it's too long to read. But this guy who's works for the American military, and he made the point that we've evolved. Like, if you stop and think about it, we've evolved over millions of years to be here having this conversation today. And everyone listening to this has evolved from a long line of creatures who survived until breeding age, had sex at least once, and passed on their genetic material to the next generation over and over again for hundreds of thousands of times in an uninterrupted line, in the most road-tested product development process of all time to bring you to today. And on an inhospitable planet, right? So we're built for reality. We're built for this world. We're built for a world of running and jumping and, you know, throwing things and all that sort of stuff. We're built for reality. And yet, much of what we do isn't in the physical world. It's in a symbolic world. So, for example, someone who's sitting looking at their phone for 5 minutes, a dog or a cat would look at them and go, what are they doing? Because there's nothing happening, right? But there's a lot happening symbolically. There's a lot happening in their heads, and there might be stuff happening in their heads that's way more important to them than what's happening in the real world. But the fact is, our mental health, our well-being, our resilience all lives in the, it's an aspect of our presence here in the world. So it seems to me that I've forgotten your question. I went on a tear, but we're built for reality. We're built for reality, and the source of mental health and well-being is something every human being carries within them. And it's the most natural thing in the world when our thought-generated objects, ideas, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, thinking about, you know, it's funny, I was doing a live coaching demonstration. It's one of the ways I work with, you know, teams and coaches and that sort of thing, doing a live coaching demonstration. And this person had a TED talk coming up in 3 weeks, and they were freaking out about it. So I'm chatting to her. I said, well, where does it seem to you like that experience of freak out is coming from? She said, well, it's coming from the TED talk that I'm doing in 3 weeks. I said, okay, now, can you explain to me how the freak out's getting from 3 weeks in the future back through time to where you are now? She's like, what do you mean? I said, well, it might be canceled. This is an internally generated experience. It's not a response to something actually in the environment. Like, our bodies and minds have evolved for a world that is, you know, we're really good at responding to and avoiding threats and stuff in the physical environment. But we've got these amazing prefrontal cortexes, which means we can create imaginary worlds. And it's the imaginary worlds that that's causing people suffering. Not because there's anything wrong with imaginary worlds, but because people don't realize that they're imaginary.
Yeah. I've forgotten the question too. But what,
well, the question, I was saying the thing about the guy in the ironing board. And
yes.
Yeah.
And actually what I love about this, so at the moment, I'm working with an organization in Wisconsin, the Department of Corrections, who are a wonderful organization to work with, and they've invested in a 12-month webinar program. So over each month, I'm introducing them more and more to the principles behind clarity. And what's so striking about the feedback that we're getting is that without teaching them necessarily any kind of, like, you know, top tips, which so many organizations are quite focused on, is the more that we teach them about how to take things off their mind, the more that we teach them about that self-correcting mind that you've spoken about, the more we teach them about where our experience is coming from at any given moment, that people that have been struggling with anxiety for years, they're just starting to sort of naturally snap out of it and feeling so much calmer, experiencing all the things that you talked about, that peace, that just, yeah, peace of mind. And I remember something that you said once or twice about this subtractive psychology. And I'd love you to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, well, if you stop and think about it, if you go to your local magazine store, every magazine will have on the cover, the top 5 tips to, a swimsuit body, or the top 6 keys to a healthy diet, or the top 5 whatevers for being rich, or whatever it might be, finding Ms. Right or Mr. Right, or whatever it might be. And the reason that they have those top 5 or 6 or 7 tips on the cover of magazines and every clickbait article on Facebook and all that sort of stuff is because marketers know that our conscious minds respond very, very well to that kind of stuff. They go, we love that stuff. But the thing about all those lists of tips is you read them, and every single one of them, you're like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Yeah, that's a great idea. And then you don't implement them. Because it's not tips that drive implementation, it's insight that drives implementation. And I ask audiences this all the time. I was speaking at the NATO Defense College, and I asked them, when do you get your best ideas? So this is an audience of military and civilian personnel. When do you get your best ideas? And the answers that came back were always the same ones, in the shower. For a walk, on holiday, driving to and from work, that sort of thing. And those great ideas, they're not just ideas. The reason they call them their best ideas is because those are the things that got implemented in their lives and made genuine change. And it's a function of a source of insight and realization and creativity that every human being has within them. So what you're saying makes total sense to me. So our conscious minds are like crackheads when it comes to top 5 tips. We absolutely love them. But the thing that makes a difference to us is genuine insight and realization. And so these days, partly because of digital technology, people have more on their mind than ever. So what subtractive psychology, which is the stuff that I'm teaching and that you're teaching, is a simple understanding people can learn that takes things off people's minds automatically, so they can have more of the confidence and well-being and happiness and calm and so on, to create the results that matter to them, because that's what it's all about. So that's what I mean by subtraction. But if you stop and think about it, understanding reality, the epistemologist Gregory Bateson said, the biggest problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature already works and the way people think. And if you think about it, the process of the evolution of human knowledge has been the process of closing the gap between how nature already works and the way people think it does. So we used to think that the sun went around the earth. It's like, oh no, it works the other way around. We used to think that stars were kept up in the sky because they were made of tinsel or heavenly matter. Oh no, it's gravity. We used to think that illness and disease was caused by bad smells and miasmas. Oh no, it's germs. So the process of the evolution of our knowledge has been a process of getting closer and closer to the reality of how it already works. So when you understand something, it takes things off your mind automatically. When you understand the principles behind clarity, it takes a lot off your mind, because the principles behind clarity are the principles behind how our psychological functioning works. The interesting thing, a while back, my colleague Kathy Casey and I went into the maximum security prison, and several prisons actually in California, to work with the inmates there in the gang unit. And it was just amazing to me, because these are guys who had been locked up. Some of them were never getting out and that sort of thing. But every single one of them was able to get into this understanding, and what they found. I was a guest on Kathy's program. Kathy had been running this program for a while in the gang unit. They found that the rates of violence dropped significantly, just as a result of people having access to that well-being that's already there within them. So it's there in everyone, and that, to me, that seems incredibly hopeful for every organization, and also for us as a civilization. You know, we, on the one hand, we have this amazing digital technology that's making all kinds of things possible. On the other hand, we have all sorts of challenges and frailties in the system and that sort of thing, which are creating, you know, big problems that need solving. And so we both need our well-being, our, you know, calm, happy, energized, available to us, and we need that source of wisdom and creativity and realization so we can solve the challenges that the digital age is bringing our way.
I'm just wondering, for some people that are watching this video or they're listening, they might be thinking, oh, Jamie's just talking about self-awareness and emotional intelligence. And so I'd love you to explain the difference between what's seen as self-awareness and emotional intelligence and the principles behind clarity.
Well, sure. I mean, there are a couple of things. Like if someone said to me, oh, you're basically, what you're saying is self-awareness and emotional intelligence, I'd probably go, oh, what did you hear that made you think that? Because what it tells me is that they've heard something. See, when people are listening to something, it's the most natural thing in the world is we try to connect it with something we already know. So when I was first introduced to the principles, that's what I did. And I was kind of like, oh yeah, I already know this. They're basically talking about this, because I didn't have an appreciation for what a principle is in the sense that we're talking about it. So there's principles like, you know, the principles of how to have a tidy room, you know, make your bed first thing in the morning and this, that. That's how we tend to think about principles. But the principles we're talking about are pre-existing facts about how the world works. Now, in history, the discovery of a principle behind something is a momentous event. So in the 1600s, Newton discovered the principle of gravity. And that was one of and the laws of thermodynamics. They were already in existence. They were already up and running, but he was able to discover and explain and describe them mathematically in a way that helped spawn the Industrial Revolution. So that's a huge, momentous thing for society. Same with Lavoisier and chemical elements. He smashed it out of the park. Same with Semmelweis and germs, and then that got driven on by Kuhn and the other guy, Pasteur. But if you think about it, like the combination of the Industrial Revolution and the germ revolution improved the standard of living on the planet by an average of 10-fold. That's a huge thing. Now, I have great respect for the folks who have done a lot of work in the field of positive psychology and emotional intelligence and that sort of thing, and my hat's off to them. But none of those is a descriptive model. The nature of principles, it's descriptive. It's just saying, this is how it already works. And when you have a descriptive model, you know, psychology, as you know, is currently a pre-principles field. The field of psychology, the reason it's called a soft science is because it doesn't yet have the foundational principles that underpin the field haven't yet been widely, you know, discovered and widely accepted. That's a stage that every field goes through. That's like physics before Newton, like cosmology before Galileo. What I'm suggesting is that these are principles. And so the cool thing about it is, if you get an insight into the principles behind clarity, it does stuff for you automatically. So I received just one example off the top of my head. I received an email from someone saying, hey, Jamie, I read your book. I know it probably wasn't meant to do this, but I'm a veteran, a war veteran. I've had PTSD for 10 years. I've had all kinds of therapy for it. None of it worked. And I read your book and now I'm mentally healthy and I don't need to go to therapy anymore. Now, I did a follow-up with her for the new edition of the book. So I included her story at the end of the book. And it's like 10 years later and she's doing great. So that was not through applying a bunch of stuff. It was through realizing something that was already true. Just like the guy who realized that the intruder in his house was actually an ironing board. What I'm going to suggest is that realizing the nature of thought, the nature of how our experience is created and who we really are, you realize that. And as you realize it more and more deeply, you automatically tap into a greater source of well-being, peace of mind, authenticity, presence, clarity, connection, performance, empathy, creativity. All of that stuff is built in for human beings. Basically, this is a shortcut way of describing it. All of that stuff is available for human beings when they're not somewhere on the scale of fight or flight.
And I know for me personally, when I came to this understanding of the principles, my mind it was like a radio dial. It just went from kind of loud FM right down to quiet FM. And it was quite interesting because I'd be walking along the seafront. I'd be like, there's just literally nothing on my mind. So just as we begin to wrap this up, Jamie, as you know, we're beginning to work with organizations to take clarity and results into organizations through a leadership coaching, group coaching program. And I'd love you to just share any examples of leadership teams where you've seen the impact on the leaders, on the organizations, on the workforce, sales, from gaining this understanding of the principles behind clarity.
Well, one that comes to mind right away. I was working with a sales team, and the European leader of sales and his team of sales writers, and we were looking in this direction, and they credited this with, I don't know, like a 50% increase in sales turnover, just because the primary headline was that they'd learned how to listen, but the deeper headline was that they were more in touch with who they really were, more able to connect with their clients, more able to notice the things that mattered and that sort of thing. So that's one example. But another example is during the lockdown with the pandemic and stuff, I had someone approach me who's a leader of an organization, saying they'd been struggling because of the lockdown. And in passing, they said, but I guess that's the same for everyone because that's what it's like. I said, well, no, actually, a lot of the people I know who know the principles are doing fine in lockdown. I said, no, I'm doing fine. In fact, for us, that 2020 was a record year because it was a time when people really saw how important mental health and well-being is. But I was benefited by the fact that I was able to see that state of affairs didn't need to mean a negative impact on business. So it was lucky in that respect. So I ended up working with that team, and they've not only been able to keep a positive outlook through the pandemic, but it's allowed them to really make progress with their plans and the things they're doing, and shape the business into the way they want it to be. A couple of other examples. One of my clients, Ian, I wrote about him in Results, so I can reference him specifically. He did a CEO intensive with me, where we basically spend 3 days together, and basically just it clears his mind and helps him have insights about strategy and business and that sort of thing. In his business, I think I don't know if I can remember.
It was about 50% increase from
it was massive increase in turnover and profitability, but also in team culture and vibe. It was just a game changer. Also, the specialist works is one that's in. I like referencing the ones in Results because I know I can name names. The specialist works as a business, again, not only saw an increase in turnover, but ended up starting a charity and coming up with ideas to bring in more business and all that sort of stuff. So one of the things I really like about it is just the increase in humanity that shows up in the terms of creativity and connection and well-being and all that sort of stuff. It's really, really heartening.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jamie. It's been a wonderful, as always, a wonderful and insightful conversation, and I can't wait to get my hands on the 10th edition of Clarity. When does that come out?
The release date is late January.
Late January. Okay, I'll pop it on my Santa Claus list.
2 months to go.
And if you're listening to this and there's anything about what Jamie and I have talked about that's really resonated with you, either as an individual or as an organisation, then do get in touch with us at info@themindsolution.com, and we can talk about the Clarity and Results program that we're currently running for organisations and business leaders. But thank you once again, Jamie. And yeah, I could be in this space with you all day, but I get to spend this weekend with you in this space. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too, Sarah.
Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody, and we will look forward to joining you again soon. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.